Sovereign power is primarily characterized by the deprivation of goods as well as the right of the sovereign to take life. Disciplinary power, on the other hand, is productive and aims to foster life. Hospitals, prisons, and schools are supposed to produce health, efficiency, and docile bodies. It is the power to foster life or disallow it to the point of death. It can be said then that disciplinary institutions are a form of biopower. Yet biopower encompasses more. It also includes the biopolitical measures of the state's administrative institutions. While biopower in disciplinary institutions is mainly about the normalization of individuals, the subject of biopolitics is the population. A population is an entity with statistical properties that can be altered by applying the proper techniques of government. The biopolitical state manages life on a statistical level. It is interested in the biological properties of the population, including health, hygiene, epidemics, life expectancy, diets, environment, and even sexuality. Biopolitics defines humans as biological entities with natural desires and interests that can indirectly be influenced. The population is usually regulated indirectly through deliberate changes to the so-called milieu. In the 19th century, the judicial apparatus of sovereign power and the disciplinary apparatus were complemented by a security apparatus. While juridical political power uses laws and punishment, and the disciplinary institutions use mechanisms of control and surveillance, the security apparatus relies on statistical measures for the regulation of a population, such as calculation of cost and risk management, or elements such as statistical norms, samples, and probabilities. According to the logic of sovereignty, the ideal territory is shaped like a circle with the capital in the geographical center. The capital city is imagined as the most outstanding place in the kingdom, with the most grandiose buildings and the most virtuous and competent people. From this center, the rest of the territory is covered by its laws, truths, edicts, and moral code. According to the logic of disciplinary power, the perfect territory is a utopian city with perfect measures built into an empty space. These utopian cities have a panoptic character. Everything is visible, while power itself stays invisible. Every place has its purpose and its individual, and every individual has its place and function. The security apparatus, on the other hand, does not exist to manage a static and perfect city, but a dynamic and optimal city. For example, inside the panoptic prison, every individual is captured in its totality and normalized. But state and city administration have a very different perspective on crime. The goal is not the total eradication of crime, but to reach an optimal percentage of criminal activities. The cost caused by criminal activity is compared to the cost of fighting it. The crime rates of different districts are compared, and the factors which influence the crime rates are identified. It is not about reaching absolute certainty, but rather the management of probabilities. The security apparatus aims at altering the milieu, which consists of natural conditions, such as rivers, swamps, and hills, and artificial conditions, such as people, houses, and streets. The alteration of the milieu is not a goal in itself, but is accomplished to manage the population. Just think of all the ways in which architecture and city planning might influence the crime rate. The security apparatus is oriented on an idea of norm, which is quite different from the disciplinary norm as well as from legal normativity. Legal normativity operates by laws that codify norms. In disciplinary institutions, normalization is accomplished by dissection and analysis. The analyzed elements are then categorized and concatenated. For example, the perfect process of loading a rifle is accompanied by drill, observation, and control. The individuals have to adapt to the established standards. The technologies of security, on the other hand, do not establish a prescriptive norm, but take the empirical norm, that which is common, as the starting point for regulation and administration. Biopower is not characterized by warlike dynamics like disciplinary power, but by governmental techniques. Here the word government is not used in the traditional sense, that is, government as the exercise of power in a state. Instead, it refers to the broader meaning it had before the 18th century. For example, one can find a government of souls in a monastery or the parish, a government of the self in ancient philosophical texts, or instructions in self-help books of the early modern age on how to govern a family. In his works, Foucault relied on this definition from Guillaume de la Perrière from 1555. Government is the right disposition of things, arranged so as to lead to a suitable end. Sovereignty is, as we have seen before, an end in itself. The sovereign passes laws to achieve a common good, but this common good is defined as a state in which everyone obeys the laws of the king and God. Furthermore, sovereignty is not exercised on things, but on territory, and consequently on the subjects who inhabit it. The suitable end, mentioned by La Perrière, on the other hand, refers to an end suitable for each of the things to be governed. But what are these things that are mentioned in the quote? Foucault gives the following definition. The things government must be concerned about, La Perrière says, are men in their relationships, bonds and complex involvements with things like wealth, resources, means of subsistence and, of course, the territory with its borders, qualities, climate, dryness, fertility and so on. Things are men in their relationships with things like customs, habits, ways of acting and thinking. Finally, they are men in their relationships with things like accidents, misfortunes, famine, epidemics, and death. Governing things requires a vast knowledge of their nature. The primary form of this knowledge is provided by statistics and political economy. Although the biopolitical state omits the justification of sovereignty for killing individuals and sets the well-being of the population as its primary goal, this state is not less deadly. Quite the opposite is true. The sovereign could kill certain individuals or hostile soldiers and revolutionaries to protect himself and his sovereignty. But for the biopolitical state, death has a different function. It has to stand in the interest of life. What is at stake is no longer the juridical existence of a sovereign, but rather the biological survival of a population. Populations could now be divided into two groups, and less life for one group means more life for the other group. From now on, killing can be exercised in the name of life itself. The group that had to be extinguished usually consisted of the so-called abnormal that filled the disciplinary institutions. The so-called feeble-minded, insane, delinquents, lower races, sick, and the sexually deviant. Society must be defended from the abnormal and degenerate. Foucault called this aspect of biopolitics state racism. The concept of biopolitics was further developed by many other scientists. Foucault himself only dealt with the subject relatively briefly. He continued his research with a historical analysis of the government of souls in monasteries and the government of the self in ancient philosophical texts. Nevertheless, the concepts of biopower and biopolitics are among the most frequently used terms in the social sciences today.